kind of moving from here to the next topic of the twins. So we have this Death Star, and the big issue is they need the plans. Well, who has the Death Star plans? None other than Anakin Skywalker and Padme Amidala's daughter, Princess Leia. And then the plans from her go to Anakin Skywalker and Padme Amidala's son, Luke
Yep.
Skywalker. It's like poetry, it rhymes. You always have
Destiny.
yeah, you always have Skywalkers in the thick of it here. So
Yeah.
trying to think of how to start this, I think we should start with one twin and then probably move to the other.
Fair
So
enough.
we see Leia first. So it's very cool. We end episode 3 with the twins going their separate ways. Leia goes with the Organas to Alderaan. Luke goes to Tatooine with his family, his aunt and uncle. And Leia is walking in the footsteps of her mother, hands down. So she certainly cares about her people, which was Padme Amidala's driving force, and really episode 1 for sure. She gets more into the galactic politics in 2 or 3, but she cares about her people and she cares about her galaxy and what's right for it. And what do we see Leia doing as a teenager? She cares about her people on Alderaan, but she cares about the galaxy as a whole because she is a major force in this budding rebellion. Her adopted father, Bail Organa, is secretly one of the main ringleaders in the rebellion, and she finds herself right in the thick of it, which is something that Padme Amidala certainly would also have done.
Yeah, no, she is. She's right in the thick of it. And it's interesting to see she is following in Padme's footsteps, but she also has that kind of fiery, I'm going to take charge and I'm going to do what I need to do regardless of what anybody else says around me. That's totally Anakin.
That's
so
Anakin.
It's cool. We will get to both twins, but you see, I don't know how much, I mean, George likes to say he had it all planned out. I don't know how much of that's true.
He had a lot of plans.
It worked out really well, though, because just the way these movies are and the way Anakin's portrayed in the prequels, you see a lot of him in both characters, which is kind of cool to see. And Leia's definitely inherited that fiery kind of sense of justice and vengeance, like that wrongs need to be righted, and I'm going to move for it. So I like the way she's portrayed in that. And you're right, she's definitely taken the political route. She's seen a lot. She's not going to have the same level of naivety that Luke's going to have because she's seen the worst. She's seen what the Empire's doing. She's very familiar with it, and so she kind of has that edge to her. That's of someone who understands the situation and is not. I mean, she's not afraid to act on anything, and so yeah, we get a really good introduction to her. Those first couple scenes with her and Vader, where she's just standing toe to toe with him, is great. She doesn't balk at all.
And you're right, that is totally Anakin. Like, I think of Anakin when he's captured with General Grievous in episode 3, and he's just being a smart aleck to Grievous. And that's what
true.
She's face to face with Darth Vader, and she's face to face with Grand Moff Tarkin, and she's just slinging insults at him. I mean, it's a 19-year-old with the bad guys of the galaxy, and she doesn't care. So it's definitely a lot of Anakin and Padme in her, and we see it as the movie goes on. She's a natural leader. Really, if you look at the group, Han Solo isn't quite there yet. Luke Skywalker isn't quite there yet. Obi-Wan is still this hermit Jedi. He knows what he's got to do. He's got the resolve, but he is very much a secondary character here. And Leia is the leader of their group. When there's question, by the time they get to her, she's the driving force of what they're doing. She tells Luke to suck it up. We got to keep going. She'll tell Han, hey, you're going to get paid, whatever, get out of here. Like, she's very much so in charge. And that is totally a Skywalker thing.
That's true. Yeah, it is very much. Yeah, because Luke and Han, they're very much main characters, but they're not the leader. Luke's this.
Not yet.
He's this wide-eyed kid who doesn't know half of what he's doing, and then Han, he's in survival mode. Han's just trying to get to the next thing to survive the next threat in the galaxy. So Leia really is the only thing that really drives them forward in a direction that's meaningful, because otherwise, she takes them to the base. She's the one that ultimately gets the plans there. Without her being that driving force, Han and Luke probably don't really go anywhere. Who knows what their future looks like? But she is. I mean,
Yeah.
she's the driving force that gets them to where they are eventually.
And also, kind of the last thing on Leia here, as far as bridging this whole story together,
Yeah.
much like Anakin, she loses everything at a very young age. I think the same
Yeah.
age as Anakin. Anakin
Right.
loses his mom in episode 2, and Padme loses everything at age 19 in episode 4 with Alderaan being blown up.
Yeah. No, that's a good point. Yeah, there's
So
a
moving,
lot of things that mirror between her
yeah.
and obviously her father. So
And I think that some of that hindsight is very cool that this started with episode 4, and then you can go
yeah,
back to 1, 2, and 3, and George can be like, "Oh, let's make these
yeah,
allusions and these foreshadowings."
it is cool. And I don't think I've ever watched the original trilogy this close to watching the prequel, like just straight
Uh,
through like this. So it's easier to find like, well, that doesn't make sense, like, or that doesn't quite line up. But it is cool that like a lot of the big picture stuff and a lot of the character moments are totally in line with those prequel movies, which is pretty neat. So
yeah. So as we move into Luke here, very different situation from Leia. Luke, like we
yeah,
said, he's not this natural born leader yet. Luke has lived on Tatooine, which is not under Imperial control technically, like as far as
right,
it's an outer rim planet.
yeah,
And so it's still very much, I mean, the Empire runs everything, but it's a different life. He hasn't had to sit and worry about what the Empire's doing because they're so poor. He's just worried about the next farming season or making sure that the Tusken Raiders aren't doing stuff or that a
yeah,
sandstorm isn't coming through. It's just a completely different existence that he's had, but it's the exact same existence minus the fact that Anakin was owned by someone else. It's the same story that Anakin had. He didn't have this freedom to go do whatever. Anakin had a master who said you can't leave, but Luke has an uncle
yeah,
who's protecting him and says
yeah,
you can't leave. You've got to stay here. And in very harsh conditions, not in royalty like Leia would have grown up with. So it's interesting the contrast you see between the two, but then it's still the same experience of one of the parents being Anakin.
yeah. And even to the fear, right, about where Luke might go. Owen makes that comment. Bruce like he's got too much of his father in him. He's like, yeah, that's what I'm afraid of, right? I mean, there's a question about if he goes off into this galaxy, what is he going to do, right? What is he going to become? And so that same fear that surrounded Anakin, you see little hints of it even with his aunt, well, primarily his uncle,
Right.
with Luke's future. And yeah, he's really like young Anakin. That's really where Luke kind of starts off, is just naive, and he wants to get out there. He wants to see the world. He feels trapped, very much like kid Anakin did back in Phantom Menace, and he has these dreams and these hopes. And he really, you touched on it, but he really has a luxury, despite the fact that Leia is the one who grew up wealthy in a
Yeah.
palace. Luke's really the one who's grown up with the luxury of just not having to worry about anything. His life
Yeah.
is very simple, whereas Leia's life has been anything but. And so he does. He makes that comment of course, I don't like the Empire, but something along the lines of, but what am I can't do anything about it. And so they have that very different mindset where Leia's seen what the Empire does and feels like she has to act, but Luke doesn't really know yet. And so he's just trying to make his way and do what he wants. So seeing those two sides that are very much Anakin, but have also driven them very different directions and leave them at very different points is pretty cool.
Yeah, I like it, especially kind of like you said. I don't think I've watched these movies with the fine attention to detail
Yeah.
as far as, hey, this is one big story. A lot of times I'll just watch it as a fan would and just enjoy it. But it's a lot more than that when you look at it like this. There's all sorts of backstory going on that play into every moment. And as we learn more through, especially Kenobi, we'll hit on this, I think, more as we go
Yeah.
through. But that series,
Yeah.
I don't think it lived up to the hype. But I still think if you're watching Kenobi and then going into episode 4, or you're
Yeah,
watching Kenobi, then Rogue One going into episode 4, those two projects enrich this movie so much. You just
I would
have
agree.
so much more weight to this. So when you're watching the twins, Leia and Luke, we see, okay, this is why Owen thinks the way he does about Luke a little bit. You see that in Kenobi. Or hey,
Yeah,
this is why Leia thinks so highly of Obi-Wan from Kenobi. And so just little things here and there from these additional projects have added a lot to it. And we'll touch more on it again, especially when we talk about Obi-Wan and Vader. It's going to be hard not to mention Kenobi when we talk
yeah,
about them.
for
But
sure.
just seeing Luke and Leia's story as it lays out, it's just so hard not to see Padme and Anakin in these twins. And as we leave episode 3, which has the twins going their separate way, coming into episode 4, seeing them come back together, if you're a first time viewer, that's going to be a very big deal, because you're like, oh,
Yeah,
these are these babies, and now they're here growing up, and they're walking in their parents' footsteps. And so, kind of like what you said in our last episode, I would love to see this through the eyes of a first time viewer,
yeah,
just because, I mean, it would be so rewarding to have that cliffhanger in 3 picking
yeah.
right up in 4 when they're in the thick of it.
It would be, yeah, and because 3 ends off, there's that little spark of hope, and there's a
Yeah,
lot
yeah,
that takes place that we have now in media, in canon,
yeah,
that happens between episode 3 and episode 4 now, but is really just kind of keeping things in place until this hope can become something, until Luke
yeah,
and Leia can really come onto the scene and begin to move towards this resolution of these events, right? Like if you look at the Bad Batch and Rebels and Andor, Kenobi, like all these shows that took place in between, none of these people are really challenging the Empire, right? They're just keeping things going until this hope, right, that existed in episode 3 really kind of like finally comes to light in episode 4. And so these twins,
yeah,
right, like this is it. This is that hope that people have been hoping would be in place, and now we're kind of to see the Empire actually be challenged as they begin to come into the thick of it. So
for sure. So, last couple things to touch on Luke,
yeah,
because we would be remiss if we didn't add in the fact that he is force sensitive,
mm-hmm.
which very much Anakin and Obi-Wan and Yoda, they
Yeah,
knew it was going to happen. They knew it was going to happen with both twins.
yeah,
They knew with Luke and Leia there would
yeah,
be a time to train them. I think Obi-Wan obviously more focused on Luke, which when we get into Empire
mm-hmm.
and into Return of the Jedi, we'll talk more about Leia's potential there. But
Yeah,
Luke is the focal point here, and Obi-Wan takes up the mantle of training Luke, and then that's very much an Anakin quality. But also we see Luke is pretty good in a starfighter as well. So that's an Anakin thing too. I mean, Anakin was the best pilot in the galaxy, and then we have Luke
yep.
Skywalker, who may very well be the best pilot in the galaxy. So it's
You
cool
think
to see all these things.
you think Luke could drive a pod racer?
Oh, at the time, no.
Yeah,
I
probably
would
not
say
at
by
this
the
point.
time he's
Maybe when he
25,
gets
he could
older.
have. Yeah, he's not the chosen one.
Yeah, it's just yeah, that's how good Anakin was.
I would be interested. I know it's out there, but what the official midi chlorian count for Luke is, because right,
Yeah,
that's how
those are
you
things
get to.
I do not know off the top of my head.
I don't either, but that's how you get to pod race. You got a high midi chlorian
I
count.
guess so. Yeah.
So yeah, Luke and Leia very much so walking in the footsteps that we would expect them to be,
Yeah.
getting ready to take on their new coming of age story.